teach here. Tell me some of the subjects you try to convey to your students, or what you teach the students here.
Well, in my role here as a professor in the USC Games program, I try and bring my game industry experience into the classroom in talking to the students about game design, game development, which is the process of building the game, and game production as well. Making a game is a little bit different from making other kinds of media like TV or cinema, I think, because of its interactive character. And so there are some special things you can do to try and make sure that the game turns out really well. And those are the techniques that I try and bring into the classroom. I count myself very lucky to have worked at a great studio like Naughty Dog that not only is really great with game design, crafting experiences full of terrific game mechanics that work really well, that create a lot of fun, where they know how to create characters that are really interesting as any we would find in a really spellbinding motion picture, but that also know how to plan and pace the development of a project so that we still have some gas left in the tank right at the end of the process, and can make sure that every last thing in the game is polished to just the right state of perfection.
So are we in a kind of game renaissance right now? I mean, it's exploding, isn't it?
Well, I definitely think we're right in the middle of an amazing renaissance for video games, yeah. Between all of the great work that's been done in the kind of AAA industry area that I worked in, big games with big budgets, creating blockbuster experiences, all the way down to the incredible work that independent game developers do. I'm involved with a festival called Indiecade that celebrates the very best in the international independent game scene. And the kind of work that those guys are doing with much smaller budgets, but with all of their ingenuity and new ideas that they are bringing to video games, it's really amazing. And then I'm also very interested in art games. You know, contemporary artists using the medium of video games to express themselves, often in very innovative new ways.
So an art game, is it still a game, or is it just a demonstration of someone's visual art skills?
Well, I think, yeah, when art games are at their best, they are definitely games, things that we as an art audience can approach and interact with. However, I think that it's useful to expand our definition of game around artistic experiences to include lots of different kinds of playfulness. I think artists have been doing this for a really long time, from the surrealists of the early 20th century to a group called Fluxus in the 60s and the 70s, who used to send each other playful games through the mail, right the way up to the present day, and the work of artists like Anna Anthropy and Jason Raw, who are making artworks that really work in the context of the art gallery.
It's not interactive in the sense that video games are, though, right?
Yeah, no, actually very often in an art gallery you'll come across a piece that has a controller, maybe on a pedestal.
Oh, really?
Or that maybe uses some other kind of interesting input mechanism, like the Xbox Kinect, that can scan the positions of our bodies and then incorporate that into the game.
Define video game and then define art game.
So video game is a very interesting definition, I think. You know, it's made up of these two words, video and game.
Yes.
And that comes, I think, from the late 70s and the early 80s, when our parents would bring home these boxes from the department store that we would plug into our televisions to play games like Pong and Pac-Man, you know, these kind of early historical ancestors of the complicated games we play today. However, maybe one day we'll need to change this term, because not every digital game that we play these days has a visual component. There are a few cool games that are audio only, for instance.
An audio only game?
Yeah, exactly.
That's fascinating.
There's a number of them. And
so you have a controller that you can interact with the audio track?
Sometimes these games will track your position in space, maybe as you jog around the city that you run in. Or maybe there might be other ways of interacting with the game, perhaps like rotating a cell phone or something like that. So yeah, there's all kinds of interesting stuff that's being done. Sometimes, increasingly, people are building the controllers into clothing. My friend, the game artist Kaho Abe, she has made a great game called Hit Me, where the game interface is two buttons on the top of two construction helmets that we wear, and we have to try and hit the other person's button in order to win the round. It's a really great game.
Like a boxing match, so scoring the knockout. You got to get it up here.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. While avoiding getting your own button hit.
And what's an art game?
Well, I think an art game would be a game that gives you an artistic experience. Of course, when we go to an art gallery, a big contemporary art gallery like the LA County Museum of Art here in Los Angeles, we might have a lot of different experiences in there. We might encounter some history and learn something perhaps about the Impressionists and the way that they were changing visual art. We might have an experience that is political, perhaps that challenges our ideas about the way the world works or the way that we relate to other people. We might just have an aesthetic experience. We might see something that we think is beautiful or that moves us emotionally. And I think that video games can do all of these different kinds of things and a lot more beside. For me, that's the real definition of an art game.
Do video games encourage socialization or do they isolate us?
Well, I think that video games can take so many different forms. Really, I often say that a video game can encompass every kind of human artwork that has ever existed. I believe that in the 18th century, there was widespread concern that the novel was very unhealthy for people. It made them socially isolated as we kind of turned into these imaginary worlds and away from each other. I think that's maybe analogous to the concern that some people have about certain kinds of single-player video games. I think that by and large, games are overwhelmingly social in their character.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, of course, a video game is an encounter between the player and the game's designer, at the very least.
Right.
Even in a single-player game, there's a communication that's happening there.
Right.
Increasingly, games that we play on the internet connect people together in large groups, potentially across thousands of miles. As someone who lives in California but is from the UK, I love to get online and play games with my friends back in England.
Yeah.
And that's a time when video games bring us together socially.
What's your game name or your avatar?
I've got a few different ones.
If you want to reveal
one that I go by is Time Pirate. So
Time Pirate?
People can watch out for me out there. I'm a big fan of the movie Time Bandits.
Love Time Bandits.
Yeah, it's a great film.
Come on.
Yeah.
Love Time Bandits.
Yeah.
Time Bandits is an awfully good film.
Video games have been around 30 to 40 years. Is that a fair?
Maybe 50 years.
Maybe
we think
50 years.
The first digital game is probably 1961, a game called Space War.
Okay. So where are we now in that evolution, and where do you see it going?
Oh, wow.
I know this is like a big
No,
one.
this is a good question, though. I think that, like I say, I think we're in a renaissance. We sometimes talk about the game industry as if it was one thing. But in fact, I think the game industry is many different connected industries with different kinds of business ecosystems, different audiences. We play games on our consoles and on our home computers, but increasingly we play them on our cell phones. There are other kinds of games that we might play in public space using decks of playing cards, specially made decks of cards. There are board games and many other kinds of games that are springing up, including theatrical performances that kind of have the character of a game. There's an amazing group called Punch Drunk, a British theatre company who often put up shows here in the United States. And their theatre pieces are very much like games that you can explore in large designed environments. With
choose your own adventure sort of
very
style?
much like a choose your own adventure, yeah. With actors who kind of appear from hidden doors to act out scenes and then who run off into these environments, leaving us free to chase one or another character that we're interested in.
Okay, I've heard of that.
So yeah, I think we're in this great kind of flowering of creativity around games. And I think that as time goes by, with the arrival of virtual reality, augmented reality, drones, I think, might play a role in this. You know, drones that could take pictures of something that's happening and maybe lead us through an environment that we're exploring. All of these new technologies will probably lead to new kinds of business and will just continue to lead to this great explosion of creativity.
What traits make someone a good gamer? And by that question, I mean, I could give you a game and you could probably crack it and do pretty well at it.
Okay. So I think
what human traits?
There are a couple of things that make for a great game player that also make often for a great game designer.
Okay.
One is to be a systems thinker. Games very often are systems of logical relationships as embodied in the rules of the game. Quite often that govern the flow of resources around the game, the way that we might find some treasure that turns into money that we can then use to buy equipment that gains us experience points. These are the basic mechanisms of games. And systems, even those based on a few simple rules, can get really complex really quickly. People who are good systems thinkers, who can anticipate how a system is going to behave as we change the rules, are often good at playing games because they can come up with good strategies, and they're also often good at designing games. I think the other big skill for gamers is related to an understanding of human psychology. You know, what makes us tick as people. And that's a lot of different things. Some of us are smart in terms of mathematics. Some of us are good with language or music. Some of us are good with emotion and are good at anticipating how other people are going to feel about something. So I think these are the kinds of skills that we also might see in a great engineer or architect, or in a great novelist or a great painter. And that for me is where the science of game design really comes together with game design as an art form. And I think that increasingly game players are really appreciative of this kind of psychological stuff as well.